Welcome back to North America. There's two lectures during the semester where I do a non-traditional format for the lecture itself. And United States is one, and then the other one will be Australia. For this one, I'm going to look at some specific subsets of geography of the United States. I'm going to look at some of the survey methods that we use to determine who owns property and what the property looks like. And then the other one will be the geography of a specific food crop. And trust me, these will be more interesting than they sound with that type of introduction. So the first idea with the survey method is how do you delineate who owns what property? And this is an old question that's gone back for centuries with control of farmland. So the early English settlement into the eastern portions of North America, they merely took with them their traditional survey method. And the British survey method is referred to as metes and bounds. And what you're doing is you're using local features to identify the edges of your property lines. And so you would go from a rock in the creek to an oak tree to the top of Spring Hill and then back down to Jones Creek. And so there'd be a book for every community that would document what the property lines were. And between that and local knowledge, people would always understand, yes, your farm runs along this area in through here. And what happens though is because of this type of methodology, it's really cumbersome and slow when you're dealing with large areas. If it's a small community in a village, it's no big deal. And usually farmers would have multiple plots of land. They'd have one area that was forested. They had one area that was pasture. They had one area that had some other feature that was needed. And so the farmer would just simply go to where that particular plot of land was to do that activity. But this is what your property lines end up looking like over time. Would arguably chaotic. So this is in one of the three handouts that I've got for in the module, posted in the module that's related to what the different survey methods look like and some information about the agricultural product. And so this is one of the ones and how it reads. It's the mouth of the branch of an ash stump, and then up the creek 20 poles to 2 beech. So that's 2 beech trees, and 20 poles is a unit of measurement. Obviously, this is cumbersome and not an efficient system, but we'll see how the United States addresses that when we get into the Great Plains, where we don't have trees, rocks, or other features that we can use for this type of system. And again, it would take too long to divide that many millions of acres of land. I used to live just outside of Boston in the Sudbury area in through here, and the roads are a nightmare because they don't really go exactly usually where you want them to go because they're avoiding those odd property lines. And so you'll get roads that come in at weird angles. 2 roads became the same road for a short distance, and then they kind of go out. In modern agricultural systems, this is a really inefficient system because your farmlands are such odd shaped and so small. Most of the farmland in New England has gone back to forest, and it's actually more forested now than it was in 1776 by a long shot. Or people just kind of keep it as estates and then they just mow the grass. Well, the French had a similar idea that farmers should have equal access to different types of land use. So they needed access to the transportation system. They needed access to farmland, forest, fields, and pasture. And so usually if you're in a valley, as you move away from the center of the valley, you go through those different conditions. You go through farmland, you go through pasture land, and then you get up into the forest the farther you get away from the bottom of the valley. And so in order to make it equal for all, you had these long, skinny plots of land that were all kind of running along whatever the mode of transportation was. In this case, it's a stream. Sometimes it's a road. It's referred to as a seigneurial system, which is awkward to pronounce. And it's usually just simply referred to as long lots, because that's exactly what they are these long lots. Well, the French settled 2 areas in North America. They settled the area in Quebec. So this is where you would find it in Canada. And then they settled the area in and around New Orleans. So you find long lots in the New Orleans area as well. And following the meandering rivers in that area. So here you can see different property uses based on the long lots. It's kind of a nightmare similar to how the meets and bounds system is a nightmare for how do you develop an odd shaped piece of land. So a lot of the agricultural uses in both the New Orleans area and the agricultural uses in the Quebec area have kind of fallen out just because it's so difficult to farm these weird shaped properties. Both of those survey methods, the meets and bounds system and the long lot systems, are tied to the local geography. You need to have some transportation route. You need to have a stream. You need to have somebody to go out and survey the width and length of the long lots. You need somebody to go out and find the rocks and the trees that you're going to use for meets and bounds. You simply can't do that on such a large scale, covering large portions of the uninhabited portions of the United States. And also, as they'd crossed the Appalachians, word was coming back in the late 1700s of the Great Plains. And so the United States, even before we were officially the United States, this was done during the Continental Congress, was the idea that we have a public land survey system. And the public land survey system is an incredible system. With a brief amount of information, you can determine exact plots of lands, except it requires that you pre-survey. So they would send surveyors out ahead of time. Remember, George Washington was a surveyor, so he felt this was important as well. So you'd send surveyors out there and they would mark off highly accurately a couple of lines. And so you'd have a very accurate, what's referred to as a baseline, one running east-west, and then a principal meridian, one running north and south. And you'd have 1 mile and 6 mile increments indicated on there. And they would have a code that they would use. And then they would go back and resurvey other areas with a much quicker method, literally taking chains with a certain length where they would flip over and measure off distances very, very quickly. As long as they could correct those every so often with the highly accurately surveyed locations, you ended up with a pretty good grid system. And so the township and range system consisted of 6x6 townships. So there were 6 miles by 6 miles, and within each 6x6 township, you had individual sections that were 1 square mile. And then those individual sections, those were the ones that were subdivided and given out as farmland or sold as farmland. Depending on what method they were using to distribute the land, usually farmers got what's referred to as a quarter section, which is a quarter of a square mile or 160 acres. There were other ones where people got 40 acres, and so that would be a quarter of a quarter section. So given a code that you see here, the NE quarter of the Northwest quarter, section 24, township 3 north, range 4 east, given that little bit of information and one more tidbit, you'd have to know what state you were looking in. So if you knew the state was New Mexico and you had this much information, this uniquely identifies in the entire United States a 40-acre parcel of land. We have no other system that can be so specific and so unique to an individual location as the township and range system. The 1992 movie Far and Away with Tom Cruise and Nicole Kidman, when they're going to get their parcel of land and identify it, it's tied to using the public land survey system. So again, surveyors would understand what this says, that this is Township 29 North, Range 3 West, which means it's the Township 29 of them north of the baseline. It's the Range 3 West, so it's 18 miles west of the principal meridian. It's whatever 29 times 6 is, miles north of the baseline. It's section number 6. And it's the northeast quarter of the southwest quarter of the southeast quarter. So this is a 10-acre parcel of land. Obviously, I'm not going to give you a map and identify each one of these systems, but know that it's a highly accurate system. It's a quick and easy method to subdivide large portions of land. It's used in most portions of the United States. There's a handful of areas that don't use it, but it's the most common one that would cover large portions of the United States. So what do you get if you're using grids and squares to subdivide the land? But when you look at it from the air, this is the resulting use. So if you've ever flown across the United States, you can see the crisscross checkerboard pattern that's created by the township and range system. So as I look at this air photo, I know that it's 1 mile from this point to this point, 1 mile from this point to this point. I know that this is 720 acres, that this is a half mile from here to here. This is 160 acres. This is an efficient measurement system. And often if you see land for sale, it's in these, what you would consider like weird increments. So you can buy 10 acres of land, 20 acres of land, 40, 80, 160 acres. You don't see 100 acres of land for sale because it's hard to subdivide this into 100 acres, but you can subdivide it into 160. So here's an 80 acre parcel because this is a half of a quarter section, so that's 80 acres. That's why you end up with those increment levels. In Orange County, the street system in North Orange County, with the exception of Anaheim, is township and range. So the streets in North Orange County run true north-south, east-west. The major streets are 1 mile apart. And you can see this park in Fountain Valley here is Mile Square Park. It was a farmland that was turned over to the military for World War II and then given back to the County of Orange afterwards. And it's one complete section, which is 1 square mile. And the city of Fountain Valley, in their ever creative mode, called it Mile Square Park. I kind of like it. This is the weapons station, so it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 square miles with a little 7 square mile down here for the weapons station. I grew up in Fullerton. See right here, you can identify my address from this detailed map. And for me to get anywhere, it was often just I'd turn left on Brookhurst and I was at the beach. I'd turn right on Orangethorpe, left on State College, and I'm at school. There's not a chance in heck you can do this in South Orange County. So North Orange County, township and range, very well organized streets. Central Orange County, it's got this weird diagonal orientation of the main streets. And this is thank you to the Irvine Company, because the Irvine Ranch used to own all of this. And so they made their streets in line with the boundary of the property. And so the other streets running this direction run at right angles to the streets that are parallel to the boundary of the property. South Orange County, no, it's just horrible. A lot of this was developed later with the Mission Viejo Company, Ladera Ranch out in through here, kind of the hodgepodge of different developments in through here, where they really weren't taking into account township and range at all. Some of these maps were drawn by people in New York City with no idea what the local terrain is like. That's why we have some roads that just go in odd directions across the side of hills. That's why you end up with what look from the air technically are square properties in Laguna Beach, but they're a square that's on the side of a hill. So this would be North Orange County, the grid system. I can live with this. You have freeways cutting through it. South Orange County, for Pete's sake, look at Olympiad. It comes out and then it goes up and then it makes a loop and then it comes back around. Marguerite kind of doesn't, it goes at this weird north-south, but it's connecting things at a diagonal. So if you don't live along Marguerite, it's not really helping you. It also creates weird traffic flows where traffic tends to get focused in just a few key areas. When we were looking for a home to move to down here, if we were on the inland side of the 5, we had to be within a half mile of the freeway, just so we wouldn't have to deal with the traffic. On this side of the 5, the traffic flows much better. I wouldn't say it's great, but it flows better. This has always been one of my pet peeves about South Orange County, is getting from A to B. It's a giant spaghetti soup of streets that go in weird directions. They're getting a little bit better at it now with some of the newer developments. So at least Ladera Ranch and some of the developments out in the Mission Viejo Company land going out Ortega Highway organize the routes a little bit better. They may be a little bit swoopy from side to side, but they don't make these weird roads that really don't go in a direction that connects 2 points. When you're doing something like this, a more direct route would have been efficient, but instead it makes these odd curves through it. All right. So one of the things you can do is look at a specific product and look at its geography, where it comes from, why it's unique to certain places, how it's marketed, how things are transported from location to location. And I got interested in this a few years ago when I went to a presentation and somebody did something on the geography of chocolate. So the cacao beans only grow in the tropics, so they would talk about the origin and some of the world's leading producing areas of cacao beans. But the areas that produce the cacao beans aren't the ones who make the chocolate. That goes to either European or North American manufacturers. So it talked about that and the transportation network, and I became fascinated that you could look at something, a product, and look at its geography. So I had a sabbatical leave a few years ago, and I looked at the geography of wine. And why I started there was because we live in California, and in California, grapes, and particular wine, are our largest crop and our most profitable crop. So why though in California? Because grapes grow just about everywhere. And so if you take a physical geography class, you'll learn about the different climate types. And our climate type is a Mediterranean climate type, where it's winter wet, summer dry. Most of the rest of the United States is what's referred to as a CF climate, where it's humid throughout the year. And grapes grow there. I mean, your Concord grape jelly comes from New England. A lot of the grapes used in food production, not wine, comes from other parts of the country. The problem is that those big, fruity, juicy, tasty grapes don't make good wine. What you want are, in a Mediterranean climate, the grapes that grow there, just as they're starting to get juicy and fat, they've got the flavors in the grape, but they haven't really come to full ripeness, it stops raining. And that freaks out the grape plant, and so it stops sending juices to the grapes, so you end up with this concentration of flavors and sugars in the grape, but it hasn't become fully ripe yet, something that you would want to eat even if it was sweet. And by the way, most of the grapes now, over the past few thousand years or so, have kind of helped those that make good wine grow, and those that don't, we don't grow in this area, so they're actually even less tasteful now than they would have been in the past. But anyway, it ends up concentrating the flavors in the grapes. And so the Mediterranean climate grapes do really well for wine production because the flavor is concentrated so much in it. So places that have that winter wet, summer dry, south of France, Spain, Italy, California, Australia, those do well with quality wine production. There's a handful of other ones that have a little bit of a dry season, and so you end up with some specialty wines that come out of, say, Oregon or out of Germany, but your major producers are those that have the Mediterranean climate. Now, this is a big industry in the United States. It's a $13 billion industry, but there's only a handful of companies that control it. And when I say control it, they've got over 80% of the wine production in the United States. And even at that, it's only one that dominates over so many other ones. But it's a weird industry because you've got these massive corporate wineries that produce the bulk of what people are drinking, and then a handful, as far as total volume, who make the really high quality, independently owned and operated wines. And those are the ones, when you're going to spend $100 a bottle, those are the ones that are not part of these conglomerates. Maybe, because they do own a couple of really nice ones. So this is outside of Santa Barbara. This is a typical wine production area where this farmer and their fields, they're cultivated, and they'll probably press them here. So this is where they'd store the grape juice once it's been pressed. But then they'll turn around and sell the juice to wineries. And so this one has a major tie to one or two wineries, but they'll also sell off some of their excess to others. And so it's quite possible that you could own a winery and not own any grape crops because you're buying your crushed grapes or the grapes themselves from someone else. So yeah, every state in the United States produces wine, but hey, my little thing didn't carry over. Sorry, I'm not going to worry about changing it. But obviously, California is the dominant producer of wine in the United States. If we look at the most valuable crop in every state, The highest value one in all of them is the $5.2 billion, and it's grapes in California. Yeah, we make some raisins and some table grapes, but for the most of that $5.2 billion, it's wine production. It's our most valuable crop in the state. We have different areas that are our major producing areas. I would say this is a little over generous putting Disneyland in a wine producing area, but there used to be vineyards in Orange County. Now there's the premium wines. These are the ones that are hand trimmed. There's the different varietals. You've got to trim the leaves at different times of the year, and you do it in a specific way. And these are going to be unique little microclimates with unique soils. And grapes also love very complex soils at depth. So you may have a gravel surface, but down below it is a really nice soil, and then the grapes will appreciate that. These are the ones that you're going to spend $20 a bottle and up on the wine. And then the wineries are typically these very, flashy places with tastings and people going around sniffing wine, spitting out wine, paying way too much for wine. So this is one of my field trips. I went to the Fess Parker Winery when I was up in the area. And this is what a lot of people picture when they picture wine from California, is they picture these types of conditions. So this is Southern California, Santa Barbara area, Napa Valley, easily the most famous wine producing area in California, and the barrels of wine and where it's produced. But is this a huge volume? Not really. If we look at Napa counties, they're less than 5% of the state total of wine. And so if we look at the Central Valley of California, going from Fresno all the way up towards Stockton, Sacramento, and through there, that's 2/3 of the wine. That's where the bulk of the wine is coming from, is from the Central Valley of California. And it sure as heck does not look like this. It's not the high quality wines. These are what are referred to as the bulk wines. The quality is not nearly what you're going to see with those specialty wines, and it's reflected in the price. When you're paying 10 times more per ton for grapes in Napa Valley than you are in Fresno, that's got to give you some idea of the quality difference between the two. And so the wine is harvested with automatic machines, and so you plant your vineyard so that these automatic machines can do their work. They've got one that will take the grapes off the plant. They've got another one that will crush the grapes, and then they've got another tank that they can push it into. So you can actually literally go from plant to crushed grape juice out in the field. And the reason you want to do this is because grapes don't like the heat. Once they've been crushed into a juice, they can go bad. You want it to turn into wine. You don't want it to turn into vinegar. People picture this. This is not the Central Valley. This is not where the wine is aging. This is not where the wine is fermenting. It's doing it in these giant stainless tanks. So this one is in, particular one is in Modesto. And this is a massive, massive complex. This single location in Modesto is the single largest single point producer of wine by a long shot. They have another plant not quite as big a few miles to the south in Turlock, and between those two, that's the world's largest wine producing area in the world. Now, having said that, California is not the world's leading wine producer. If we took the total of Italy or the total of France, it's more than California, but they don't have this single massive plants like we do in the Central Valley of California. So the one south of Turlock, this is about as close as you can get. I tried to get on the site, but the guard, I kind of was talking to him, and he wouldn't let me in. And yes, this is Gallo. They are the world's largest producer of wine, but they own a whole bunch of different wineries. Another one that owns a bunch of different wineries is the Wine Group. I just happened to stumble across this while I was driving through the Central Valley. I was taking a route. If you're familiar with the Central Valley of California, there's two highways that parallel each other going up the valley, the 5 and the 99. So I was driving in the middle between the two. So Gallo, that's the one in Fresno. Wine Group, that has scattered crushing ones. They don't have a single massive plant, but they've got lots of big plants. Constellation Brands, those are the big three, and all three of those are in California predominantly. And if we look at the top 10, they're 13% of the world's total. That's a staggering amount of wine that comes from just 10 companies. But for Gallo, this is the Gallo family here. They don't just produce that cheap Gallo wine, which is $2.99 a bottle, and even at that, that's overpriced. They have a whole family. At that volume, they're going to get lucky and get some vintages that turn out really well, and so they'll sell that at a premium. They'll sort their grapes prior to crushing them in order to get the higher quality ones to get some better wines out of it. And some of the other ones that are kind of meh, they'll blend together to minimize that, and that's where you get the cheaper wines out of it. And the one that kills me is the number one selling brand of wine in the entire world is Barefoot. It's got a $5 or $6 price point. It's a little bit better than the number 2 selling wine in the world, the Gallo, which has about a $3 or $4 price point. Now, changing tastes for the American population. For a while, we were looking for more distillates, vodkas and rums. And so Gallo bought a vodka producing company and they bought a rum producing company. So they've expanded out. I think they were going to buy a brewery for beers and ales, but I haven't been able to find out if that went through or not. So a lot of this wine is coming out of California in boxes and in jugs, but it's still, we're the big producers of wine in the world. Hold on. Somebody's at the door. I was hoping it was a wine delivery and it wasn't. It was just the UPS guy with something from Amazon. That was really disappointing. All right. Thank you for joining me on our trip through the United States, looking at how we divide the land and what that ends up looking like after we divide the land and survey it and subdivide it. And then also, for those of you over the age of 21, I hope you enjoy a little glass of wine with the lecture. For those of you under 21, I hope you enjoyed your non-alcoholic beverage with the lecture. And I will see you next in Latin America.